At 5:04 p.m. on October 17, 1989, a 1.6-mile section of Interstate 880 in Oakland collapsed onto itself. The Cypress Street Viaduct was a double-deck freeway, 4 lanes of southbound traffic on top, 4 lanes of northbound traffic below, all stacked on reinforced concrete columns. When the ground shook for 15 seconds, 14 city blocks of the upper deck pancaked onto the lower deck. Cars were crushed to the height of about 3 feet. The road fell on the people it was built to carry. 42 people died, most of them instantly, trapped in their vehicles as thousands of tons of concrete collapsed on top of them. The Cypress structure became the single deadliest site of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, accounting for 2/3 of the quake's total fatalities. But the numbers don't tell you what kind of failure this was. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was a design tragedy, exposed by an earthquake.
It's something that is beyond belief. There are rush hour cars, rush hour traffic that was trapped on this lower level. You can see the upper level sitting on top of the lower level right now. Those cars, those people still trapped underneath there.
You could hear voices screaming, "Help me, help me, help me," until the fire just started. Then you don't hear them no more.
The promise. The idea for the double-decked highway came in 1949. The city of Oakland needed a way to ease traffic on local streets leading to the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. Cypress Street, which carried State Route 17 at the time, was overwhelmed. The solution? Stack 2 freeways on top of each other, doubling capacity without doubling the footprint. It was optimization logic. California was in the middle of its freeway boom, the 1950s vision of moving cars fast, maximizing capacity, and minimizing land use. The engineers faced a choice: buy more land to widen the freeway or build upward. Building up was cheaper. It required less demolition, used less urban space, and could deliver more lanes for less money. The route was also strategic. Built during what historians now call the White Roads through Black Bedrooms era, the Cypress Freeway cut directly through West Oakland's primarily African-American neighborhoods. The alignment was partially chosen to displace what city planners perceived as slums. The freeway would eventually form part of a concrete noose around West Oakland, I-880 Cypress, cutting through the middle, I-580 MacArthur, dividing it from northern neighborhoods, and I-980 creating a literal wall between West Oakland and downtown. Construction of the Cypress Freeway alone resulted in the destruction of 5,000 homes. But those social costs were barely acknowledged in 1949. What mattered was efficiency. The southernmost portion, designed as a central off-ramp structure from Market Street to the 8th Street/7th Street on off-ramps, was completed in October 1955 by contractors Fredrickson and Watson at a cost of $1.7 million. Construction on the double-decked viaduct portion began in February 1956, contracted to Grove, Wilson, Shepard, and Krug for $8.3 million. Total cost, $10 million. On June 11, 1957, the Cypress Street Viaduct officially opened to traffic. It was California's first double-decked freeway, a pioneering design that seemed to solve the problem of urban highway capacity in a stroke of vertical ingenuity. The promise was simple: more lanes, less land, faster commutes. The structure would move thousands of vehicles daily through West Oakland, connecting the East Bay to San Francisco via the Bay Bridge. It was modern, efficient, and, everyone assumed, permanent. For 32 years, it worked exactly as designed. The Cypress structure's advantage was vertical stacking. By building up instead of out, engineers achieved extreme capacity per square foot. 2 complete roadways occupied the footprint of 1. It saved urban space, avoided additional land acquisition in Oakland, and created efficient traffic throughput. The design wasn't experimental. California built other double-deck freeways using similar logic. The Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco, portions of the Central Freeway. Stacking was a proven approach, replicated across the state's growing highway system. The efficiency was real and measurable. Where a conventional freeway might require a 200-foot wide right-of-way to accommodate 8 lanes, plus shoulders and buffers, a double-deck design could deliver the same capacity in half the space. In dense urban areas like West Oakland, where land acquisition meant displacing homes and businesses, vertical stacking looked like an elegant solution to an expensive problem. The Cypress structure carried approximately 195,000 vehicles daily before the collapse. That's thousands of commuters every hour, moving between Oakland and San Francisco, between the East Bay suburbs and the city, between the port and the rest of the region. The structure was a critical link in the Bay Area's transportation network, not optional infrastructure, but essential capacity that the region depended on for daily function. But that same advantage, concentrating weight vertically, carried a hidden structural consequence. Instead of distributing the load across a wide footprint, the double-deck design concentrated immense weight onto relatively few support columns. Some sections of the Cypress Viaduct were supported by 2 columns on either side. Other sections relied on a single central column. The entire mass of 2 roadways, all the traffic they carried, all the concrete and steel and pavement, focused down onto those points of support. This wasn't inherently unsafe. The columns were engineered to carry vertical loads. Under normal conditions, static weight, traffic moving predictably, no lateral forces, the columns were more than adequate. They held up the structure for 32 years without failure. The problem was what happened when conditions stopped being normal, when forces came from directions the design hadn't anticipated. The columns were designed according to pre-1970s seismic standards. That meant insufficient ductility, the ability to flex and bend without breaking, weak transverse reinforcement, the steel ties that hold the column together under lateral stress, not enough steel confinement, the reinforcing that prevents concrete from bursting apart, upper portions of columns not tied by reinforcing to lower portions. The design assumed that columns wouldn't experience extreme lateral shaking, so engineers didn't design for ductile flex, energy dissipation, or progressive failure prevention. The columns were built strong for the loads they would carry vertically. They were brittle for the forces they would experience horizontally. And the structure sat on filled land. Soil deposited on top of bay clay, filled land is highly susceptible to amplification during earthquakes. The ground shakes harder, longer, more violently. Bay clay exhibits even larger ground motion, turning seismic waves into extended shaking that structures must endure far longer than on solid rock. It's the worst possible foundation for seismic resistance. Soft, unstable, prone to liquefaction and settlement. At the time of its design in 1949, engineers didn't analyze such structures as a whole. They designed the columns, they designed the roadway, they calculated static loads and traffic impacts, but they didn't model how the entire structure would behave during large-scale motion, how the upper deck might move independently from the lower deck, how the columns might be subjected to torsional forces, how the weight concentrated on those supports would behave when the ground moved laterally instead of just vertically. Modern seismic engineering treats buildings and bridges as dynamic systems that respond to motion. Engineers model how structures flex, where stress concentrates, how components interact during shaking. They design for energy dissipation, allowing structures to bend in controlled ways that absorb seismic energy without catastrophic failure. In 1949, that approach didn't exist yet. The Cypress structure was designed as a static system that would hold weight. When that system was subjected to dynamic forces it wasn't designed to handle, it failed exactly the way brittle structures fail. suddenly, completely, without warning. The Cypress structure wasn't poorly built, it was built to the knowledge available at the time, which makes what happened next even more tragic. By 1971, that knowledge had changed.
Quarter-mile upper deck section of the 880 freeway pancaked onto the lower deck. 42 people died, crushed in their cars. The detached, unstable structure made rescue efforts difficult and dangerous.
It was a progressive collapse.
Here's the belief that killed 42 people. Reinforced concrete is strong enough. More precisely, pre-1971 seismic standards are adequate. On February 9, 1971, the San Fernando earthquake struck Southern California. Magnitude 6.6. The quake killed 65 people and caused extensive damage to infrastructure. Critically, it revealed how older freeway structures performed during seismic events. Poorly. Column shear failures were common. Viaducts and overpasses that looked solid under normal conditions proved fragile when the ground shook laterally. Highway bridges collapsed. Parking structures pancaked. The damage pattern was clear and specific. Brittle concrete columns built to older standards failed catastrophically under seismic loads. California learned. After San Fernando, the state updated its seismic building codes, tightened standards for new construction, and began identifying older structures that needed retrofitting. Engineers developed new approaches: ductile detailing, steel confinement, transverse reinforcement designed to hold columns together under shear stress. The goal was to allow structures to flex and absorb energy rather than resist rigidly and break. The Cypress structure was flagged as seismically vulnerable. It met every criterion for high-risk infrastructure: double-deck design, concentrated loads, brittle columns, soft soil foundation, location in an active seismic zone. Retrofit plans existed. The engineering was straightforward. Add steel confinement to columns, improve ductility, strengthen the connections between upper and lower sections, increase transverse reinforcement. It wasn't experimental work, it was the application of lessons California had already learned. But retrofitting costs money, real money. The work would require closing sections of freeway, disrupting traffic, paying contractors, buying materials, managing logistics. And the collapse probability, while acknowledged, felt low enough that the work could wait. The structure had been standing for 14 years since the San Fernando quake. It carried nearly 200,000 vehicles daily without problems. Yes, it needed upgrades, but those upgrades entered a queue of competing priorities. California had thousands of aging structures, bridges, overpasses, viaducts, all built to pre-1971 standards, all needing varying degrees of seismic improvement. The state couldn't retrofit everything simultaneously. Decisions had to be made about priority, urgency, resource allocation. Some structures posed immediate danger. Others were flagged for eventual upgrade. The Cypress structure fell into the latter category. Vulnerable, yes, but not imminently dangerous under normal conditions. In 1977, a small degree of earthquake reinforcement was added to the Cypress Street Viaduct, not a comprehensive retrofit, just minor improvements, enough to acknowledge the vulnerability without committing to a full structural upgrade. The work was documented. The engineers did what the budget and timeline allowed. Then they moved on to other projects. The system knew the structure was at risk. Engineers understood that brittle columns on soft soil in an active seismic zone represented a dangerous combination. Retrofit plans existed. The knowledge was there. The vulnerability was documented in official reports, reviewed by Caltrans engineers, understood by seismic specialists. But the urgency wasn't. Thousands of other structures had similar vulnerabilities. Budgets were finite. Political will was limited, and the probability of a major earthquake striking that specific structure at that specific time felt remote enough to justify delay. Not cancellation, just delay. The work would happen eventually. when funding materialized, when schedules aligned, when political priorities shifted enough to make seismic retrofitting a budget priority. This is how warning flares fail, not through ignorance, but through deferred action. The risk is acknowledged, studied, documented, and then deprioritized because fixing it is expensive and the disaster feels theoretical. Every day, the structure stands without incident, reinforces the sense that the danger is manageable, that the existing condition is acceptable, that comprehensive retrofitting can wait another year until it stops being theoretical. October 17, 1989, started as an unusual Tuesday in the Bay Area. The Oakland Athletics and San Francisco Giants were playing Game 3 of the World Series at Candlestick Park. It was the first Bay Bridge World Series in history, both teams from the same region, a source of civic pride and intense local interest. Many people left work early to watch the game. Others stayed late, planning to leave after the first pitch at 5:35 p.m. That timing would save lives. At 5:04 p.m., 31 minutes before the game was scheduled to start, traffic on the Cypress structure was lighter than usual. Not empty, but significantly reduced compared to a normal rush hour. The commuters who would have been driving home were either at the game, watching from home, or waiting at work. Then, the ground moved. The Loma Prieta earthquake, magnitude 6.9, epicenter near Santa Cruz, about 60 miles south of Oakland, struck at 5:04 p.m. In Oakland, on the soft bay fill beneath the Cypress structure, the shaking was amplified and prolonged. For 15 seconds, the ground moved laterally with enough force to break the brittle concrete columns. The columns failed the way brittle structures fail, suddenly, catastrophically, without warning. The upper portions of the columns weren't tied by reinforcing to the lower portions. When lateral forces exceeded what the weak transverse reinforcement could contain, the columns burst. Concrete exploded outward. The upper deck lost its support, and physics took over. 1.5 miles of double-deck freeway, weighing thousands of tons, collapsed. The upper roadway fell onto the lower roadway, sandwiching cars and people between 2 layers of concrete. Steve Whipple, a Caltrans engineer who would spend days in the rubble, remembered arriving at the scene. Some cars weren't that crushed, and people had crawled out of them. Our job was really to assess the structure and to secure the structure so that we could go through a body recovery. By the time rescue workers arrived, the reality was clear. This wasn't a rescue operation. It was recovery. The spaces between the collapsed decks were measured in feet, sometimes inches. Cars were flattened. The odds of survival were close to zero. Neighbors rushed in anyway. Local residents climbed onto the shattered structure, crawling into voids, trying to reach anyone still alive. Many people were saved in those first hours, pulled from crushed vehicles, some only by amputation of trapped limbs. But most of the 42 who died were gone in the first seconds of collapse, killed instantly by the weight of the road above them. The image that killed trust was simple. The road fell on itself, not onto the street below, not into the bay, onto itself. The upper deck dropped directly onto the lower deck, creating a grotesque concrete sandwich with crushed vehicles visible between the layers. It was a betrayal of the most fundamental promise of infrastructure. Roads are supposed to protect you, not kill you. When you drive onto a freeway, you're trusting that the structure will hold. The Cypress structure violated that trust in the most visceral way possible. The road became the weapon. The pancake collapse became one of the most enduring images in U.S. infrastructure history. Television cameras captured the scene. 14 city blocks of highway stacked flat. Rescue workers climbing ladders to reach the upper deck. Cars crushed to impossible thinness between concrete slabs. John and Medell Stafford pulled alive from the lower deck at West Grand Avenue, embracing after their rescue, a moment of relief surrounded by devastation. Rescuers working to remove the dead along the top deck. smoke rising from wreckage. The sheer scale of structural failure made comprehensible only when you saw human beings standing next to the collapsed sections, dwarfed by the mass of concrete that had fallen. For days, rescue workers searched. Jack Thompson, a machinist from Albany, found Nicholas Zaninovich in the dark rubble and spent 4 hours digging him out. Then he turned around, expecting the crews to go back up the ladder to search for more survivors. Nobody went back up. I turned around and looked and thought, "We got Nicholas out, but there were people in other cars," Thompson said. "I waited for them to go back up the ladder, and nobody went back up." Thompson came back every day for a week. He was convinced there were still others trapped alive. "I've got to live with this my whole life," he said, knowing there was more that could have been done to get people out. He was right. 89 hours after the earthquake, 4 days later, Steve Whipple was inspecting the structure during downtime when he saw movement. Buck Helm, a 57-year-old longshoreman from Weaverville, was still alive, trapped in his car crushed to a height of about 3 feet, seatbelt still fastened. Buck was luckily conscious at the time, Whipple remembered, his voice breaking 3 decades later. And so when I was near his car and shining the flashlight on his car, he made a motion that he was still alive. The Bay Area erupted in hope. Helm's rescue became a symbol of endurance, proof that miracles could emerge from catastrophe. They pulled him out, threw him in an ambulance, and, yeah, there was cheering and clapping, Whipple said. And as soon as he drove away, I just walked away to be by myself. Buck Helm died 29 days later. The injuries from being trapped for 89 hours were too severe. His ex-wife, Lorene Helm, had visited him in the hospital. "When we talk with our eyes, with his hands, and with the love that we feel for each other," she said before he died. Steve Whipple never saw Helm's family after the rescue. "The fact that Buck didn't survive ultimately was disappointing," he said. "I never did see him. I never did see his family. Conditions didn't seem right with them trying to take care of him, and I didn't want to intrude." The poison wasn't just the physical collapse. It was the knowledge that it didn't have to happen. The structure had been flagged, retrofits had been recommended. The vulnerability was documented, and 42 people died anyway. The Cypress structure was deemed irreparable within days. There was no salvaging the collapsed sections. The structural integrity was gone. Even the portions that hadn't collapsed were compromised, subjected to forces they weren't designed to withstand, potentially weakened in ways that wouldn't be visible without extensive testing. Full demolition began. The twisted wreckage was cut apart, loaded onto trucks, hauled away. The process took months. Each section removed revealed more crushed vehicles, more victims. The final death toll, 42, including 6 members of one family, Vin Phu, an automobile mechanic, age 32, along with Ray L. Holmes, a structural engineer ironically, age 50, Timothy Moss, a Pacific Bell manager, age 40, Juan Daniel Luis Ruby, a sunroof installer, age 28. While demolition crews worked, the larger question loomed: what do you rebuild? The freeway had to be replaced. I-880 was a critical artery connecting Oakland to San Jose, part of the interstate system, essential to regional transportation. But the community had learned what double-deck freeways could do. Nobody in West Oakland wanted another Cypress structure. Nobody in California wanted to build another ticking time bomb. President George H.W. Bush, Representative Pete Stark, Oakland Mayor Lionel J. Wilson, and Representative George Miller inspected the damage together. At one press conference, Daniel Ruby, whose son was on the missing persons list, was removed after asking Mayor Wilson how he felt being solely responsible for the freeway collapse. The question was cruel and unfair, but it reflected the raw anger in the community. The decision: reroute entirely. Instead of rebuilding over Cypress Street, the new I-880 would loop around West Oakland using a largely ground-level design, with conventional single-level viaduct sections where elevation was necessary. The space would come from relocating a railroad yard. The old route, the path of the Cypress structure, would not be rebuilt. Cypress Street was renamed Mandela Parkway in honor of Nelson Mandela. Where concrete had stood, the city planted a landscaped median strip with trees and grass. A memorial park was created at 14th Street and Mandela Parkway, with a sculpture and murals remembering the 42 who died. The new freeway alignment took years to complete. The replacement route required purchasing land from Southern Pacific Railroad and Amtrak, moving portions of the rail yard, constructing new interchanges, and accommodating traffic through the Oakland Army Base. Archaeological work during construction revealed extensive artifacts from West Oakland's 19th century history, remnants of the neighborhood that existed before the freeways came. The project cost approximately $1.2 billion, far more than initially expected, but it was built to new seismic standards. The columns were designed with ductility. The structures could flex. The engineering reflected everything California had learned from San Fernando and Loma Prieta combined. The new Cypress Freeway link between I-980 and I-80/580 opened in mid-1997, 8 years after the collapse. The ramps at the Maze Interchange followed in 1999. By 2010, nearly $2.5 billion had been allocated to improvements along the entire I-880 corridor, widening sections, rebuilding interchanges, adding HOV lanes, modernizing designs that had been built in the 1950s. The Cypress structure was gone, but its ghost shaped every decision about seismic safety, freeway design, and urban infrastructure that came after. Today, Mandela Parkway runs through West Oakland where the Cypress structure once stood. Trees line the median. Grass grows where cars were crushed. It's quiet, green, the opposite of a freeway. The neighborhood reclaimed the space the freeway had taken. Though West Oakland remains surrounded by freeways on all sides, still one of the most polluted neighborhoods in California, with among the highest asthma rates per capita in the state. The Cypress Freeway Memorial Park stands at 14th and Mandela, a permanent reminder. The names of the 42 who died are listed. There's a sculpture, murals. On the anniversary, people gather. Some are family members. Some are survivors. Some are rescuers who still carry what they saw. Steve Whipple retired from Caltrans, his career forged by what he witnessed in October 1989. The memories are as fresh as the day it happened, he said 30 years later, choking back tears. He spent his working life making sure scenes like the Cypress structure would never be repeated, working on bridges and highways around the Bay Area, implementing the lessons California learned when the road fell on itself. What survived was a new philosophy. Seismic design standards tightened dramatically. Stricter retrofit programs became mandatory statewide. Double-deck freeways fell out of favor. Not because they couldn't be built safely. With modern engineering and proper seismic design, they could be. But because the Cypress structure had demonstrated the catastrophic consequences when assumptions proved wrong. The replacement I-880 exists, functional and forgettable, carrying traffic without drama. That's what infrastructure is supposed to be. Invisible, reliable, taken for granted. The fact that the new alignment is unremarkable is the point. It works. It doesn't require trust because it's built to survive the conditions California actually experiences, not the conditions engineers hoped would never occur. What died was more than a structure. 42 people. Commuters heading home. A longshoreman who survived 4 days only to die a month later. Families waiting for loved ones who never arrived. A structural engineer who understood bridges, killed by one. A mother, father, and their children. People whose lives ended in 15 seconds of shaking, crushed by a road that promised to carry them safely home. The West Oakland community's fabric, already torn by freeway construction in the 1950s, suffered another wound. 5,000 homes had been destroyed to build the Cypress. Then, the freeway itself became a monument to failed optimization, a concrete scar through the neighborhood that collapsed and killed the people driving through it. Trust in stacked freeways, not just in Oakland, but everywhere. After Cypress, every double-deck structure in California became suspect. The Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco, also damaged in the quake, was demolished entirely rather than repaired. The city chose to tear it down and open up the waterfront. The Central Freeway's upper deck was removed. The philosophy shifted. If you can avoid stacking, avoid it. The lesson the Cypress structure teaches is philosophically clean. When you concentrate weight vertically onto brittle supports and build those supports on soft ground in an active seismic zone and delay retrofitting because the probability feels low, you haven't prevented catastrophe. You've just scheduled it for a date you don't know yet. October the 17th, 1989 was that date. At 5:04 p.m., for 15 seconds, the ground moved laterally, the brittle columns burst, and the road fell on the people it was built to carry. No villain, no weather, no ship, no funding drama, just physics meeting outdated assumptions. The most Greek tragedy of infrastructure failures. The flaw was built into the design from the beginning, invisible until the ground shook, inevitable once the shaking started. The Cypress structure promised efficiency. It delivered 32 years of functionality. Then it collapsed in 15 seconds and taught California that optimization without resilience isn't engineering. It's a timer counting down to failure. What remains is grass and trees, a memorial park, 42 names on a wall, and a region that learned, at the cost of those lives, that when you build infrastructure in earthquake country, you design for the disaster, not despite it.